At the end of King Solomon's reign over Israel, God told a man named Jeroboam that he would become king over all but one of the tribes of Israel. But Solomon wasn't ready to give up the throne, so he tried to kill Jeroboam, who escaped and fled to Egypt. A short while later, Solomon died, and his son Rehoboam was named king. The people were unhappy with the heavy taxes placed on them and went to complain, along with their spokesperson, Jeroboam. Despite their complaints, the king refused to listen. Furious, most of Israel made Jeroboam their leader and lived in the northern territory called Israel, where Rehoboam ruled over the southern tribe called Judah. After being a united country for many years, Israel was now split in two. The new king of the northern territory, Jeroboam, was worried that when his people returned to the south in order to worship at the temple in Jerusalem, they might be persuaded to become loyal to Rehoboam instead of him. So he devised a plan. He constructed 2 golden calves and told his people that they were the gods that helped them escape from Egypt many years earlier. Then he had a huge festival to worship these gods, and unbelievably, the Israelites went along with it. Then one day, Jeroboam was at one of the altars making a sacrifice, when a man who followed God approached Jeroboam and warned him that his kingdom would soon be ruined. Jeroboam stretched out his arm and shouted, "Seize him!" As he did, his hand shriveled up. Terrified, Jeroboam pleaded with the man to pray for him. So the man prayed for Jeroboam's hand, and it was healed. Even after this display of God's power, Jeroboam still led the people to worship other gods. For years, Jeroboam and Rehoboam were at war. When Rehoboam died, his son and then grandson took over as kings of Judah. His son worshipped other gods just like his father. But Rehoboam's grandson, Asa, was different. Asa got rid of the idols and was fully committed to following God. The northern kingdom of Israel continued to be led by a series of wicked men, none of whom followed God. One of these kings was Ahab, who did more evil in the eyes of God than any king before him. Perhaps worst of all, Ahab married Jezebel, a woman from a foreign country who convinced him and almost all of Israel to worship a foreign god named Baal. Because of this, God would need to send a messenger to set things straight.
Well, good morning yet again, and welcome to the Summit Online. We are honored that you've joined us. And if you're visiting with us, my name is Jamie. I'm the lead pastor here, and it is an honor to be with you as we navigate through this crazy season of online church as we walk through this pandemic together as a country, as a province. And we are believing and believe fully that God is still at work, even in the midst of all of this chaos. We're honored that you've joined us this morning, and we believe that God has something unique and powerful to say to you, and that we are praying that God would move in power in your life, in your family, and that He would move in power across our region. Our whole purpose for gathering is to guide people to an elevated life in Jesus. But I want to take a couple quick announcements, quick moments to give you a couple quick announcements, that just so you know what's happening throughout the upcoming weeks. First, the first announcement that I want to make to you is that I want you to know that if at any point throughout this gathering that you would like someone to pray with you, that our pastors are here to pray with you. And all you have to do is text the word prayer to 1-844-502-0550, and one of our pastors will reach out to you, and we can pray with you. We can call you to pray with you, whatever you would like. We want to pray with you. Second announcement I have is this: that we have and are thankful for your giving throughout this season. that because of your giving back to God what he's blessed you with, that we're able to do what we do to continue to reach our region. And if at any point throughout this gathering you would like to give, you can do so by going to our website at thesummitcommunity.com/giving, or you can go to e-transfer finance at thesummitcommunity.com, or you can send a text if you would like to 1-8. Let me get this right. 7844. Now I can't remember it. We'll have to put it up on the screen in just a minute. But you can do so. We would love to continue to partner with you as we reach our region. The last announcement I have is this, that for all voting members, we do have a special business meeting coming up to discuss the parsonage in Echo Bay. The meeting will be May the 16th at 4 p.m. On Zoom. It will only be available on Zoom, so we just ask that you register so that we can have this meeting to discuss the future and the ministry that we have planned in Echo Bay. So that's all the announcements. Let's move on with our morning. This morning we're launching a brand new series called God is Speaking. Are we listening? Are we listening to God as he speaks to us? In the midst of this pandemic, in the midst of life and the chaos of everything that surrounds us, God is speaking. Are we listening? And we're going to continue to look at the nation of Israel and how God was speaking to the nation of Israel. And there were many points in their history where they put two fingers in their ears and they plugged so they couldn't hear God speaking. But God wants to speak to you, and he wants to speak to me, and he wants to speak to our region and our nation. And we are going to continue to dig through the story as we discover God's stories, to discover God's upper story and how it collides with our lower story. We're going to see how God speaks to the nation of Israel throughout this series. But before we do, why don't we have a little bit of fun? And around your couch or your table or wherever you find yourself watching, we want to see how well you can do on this top 5. Now, please, no Google searching. Please, no using your phone to find it or changing this browser so that you can go to something else. Stay with us and see if you can get these off the top of your head. Can you name for me in 30 seconds the top 5 family feuds from movies and TV? Ready? Go. All right, your time is up. Let's see how well you did on this top 5. Now remember, don't get mad at me. Don't throw anything at me. I didn't create this list. It wasn't my idea. I'm just presenting it to share with you and see how well you did on this top 5. Number 5 on the top 5 family feuds from movies and TVs is the Barlows versus the Platts from Coronation Street. The Barlows versus the Platts from Coronation Street. Number 4 on the list is House of Stark versus House of Lannister from Game of Thrones. From the Game of Thrones. Number 3 on the list is the Corleones versus the Barzinians from The Godfather. Number 2 on the list is the Clampetts versus the Drysdales from the Beverly Hillbillies. And the number 1 family feud from movies and TV is the Montagues versus the Capulets from Romeo and Juliet. Now, I hope you enjoyed that, and I know some of you go, what does that have anything to do with God speaking? Well, you're going to see in just a minute. You're going to understand in just a minute how this plays out. But before we do, let me tell you this. There's 2 families, the Hatfields and the McCoys. American history. These families feuded from 1863 to 1901, a period of 38 years where they fought with each other, where they fought against each other, family against family. It was like, don't even think about going across the street to the Hatfields. Don't even think about associating with the McCoys. It was this major tension point. Do you know what caused these families to start feuding? Well, here, let me tell you. The first recorded feud incident came in 1863 when a guy from the McCoy family, Asa, he was returning home from the Civil War, and he was murdered. And it was assumed that it was one of the Hatfields, and they were blamed for it. So they thought that this is why the whole problem started. And although it was years later that they discovered that the Hatfield brother that they thought killed him was home sick and couldn't have actually done it, the feud continued. Well, it didn't end there. It didn't end there. There was a few years later, there became this incident where violence struck between the two families. Ready, 13 years later over this. The ownership of a hog. No, seriously. The ownership of a hog. Are you kidding me? I mean, this leads to generations fighting and fighting and fighting. This is you only see this in movies, right? No, this is real life. This is real life, and it's taking place here in our world. They're feuding and fighting, families against families. And it's destroying nations. As we begin and read chapter 14 of the story, as we continue our journey through the Old Testament, we begin to see this feud begin to start. We could easily title this chapter, McCoys versus the Hatfields of the Old Testament. It's in this chapter that we begin to see the nation of Israel become divided and split. And tensions begin. And tensions start. And I want to read for you from the story, the beginning of this chapter, just to help us to understand. It says this: through the prophet Ahijah, God told a rising young star in Solomon's administration by the name of Jeroboam that he would be the future king. God would give Jeroboam all but one of the tribes of Israel. After possibly making a preemptive bid for the throne, Jeroboam learned to wait for God's timing. Solomon was not ready to relinquish the throne and tried to kill Jeroboam to keep him from becoming king. Jeroboam fled to Egypt and waited there for an opportunity to make his move. Solomon's king still of Israel, even though he's gone through the destruction and has been told by God that his kingdom is going to be removed. And a prophet tells this young man that he's going to be king. But he gets eager and tries to take it for himself. Solomon's not ready to give it up. So Solomon then tries to kill him. And Jeroboam flees to Egypt afraid for his life. After Solomon dies, his own tribe of Judah automatically accepts his son Rehoboam, not Jeroboam, Rehoboam, as the next king. But much of the population, especially from the other tribes, had grown to resent Solomon's heavy taxation and conscripted labor for his grand projects. As representatives from all the nations gathered to make Rehoboam king, they let their complaints be known. So here's this moment in Israel's history where the transition of kingship, is about to take place. Solomon has died, and it's about this transition. Much like when David transitioned, he died, Solomon took the charge. Well, remember, God said that Solomon's line is no longer going to be king. But the nation is trying to make their own king yet again. So Jeroboam, who's been promised to be king, is hiding in Egypt. Solomon dies, and Rehoboam, Solomon's son, is appointed to be king by his own nation, his own region of people in Judah. This is getting a little crazy, isn't it? And a little complicated. We're about to learn about a kingdom that is torn in two. A kingdom torn in two. Jeroboam hears that they've made Rehoboam king. And so he makes his way back from Egypt to the inauguration where this is going to happen, where this son of Solomon is going to be king, even though in logic he's not supposed to. He's thinking, I'm supposed to be the king. So he comes back to Rehoboam to see if maybe he could lessen the harsh punishments that King Solomon had placed on the nation of Israel. And Rehoboam, in answering the challenge to Jeroboam, decides that he's going to go and speak to the elders, those who were a part of Solomon, his father's regime. That he thought he'd go and talk to those who served his dad, the older experienced guys, the ones who've been through life, who understand it a little bit, to get their opinion. And here's the advice that they gave him in chapter 12 of 1 Kings. Verse 7, they said this: the older council replied, if you are willing to be a servant to these people today and give them a favorable answer, they will always, I love it, they will always be your loyal subjects. This is the advice that the elders give to Rehoboam. If you choose to be a servant to those people, they will be your loyal subjects. Kind of like saying, this is a wise move. Get them on your side. Well, Rehoboam, young, maybe a little bit cocky, maybe a little bit proud, decides, not only am I going to get advice from them, but I'm going to reject it just a little bit, and I'm going to go and visit some young men that I grew up with, and I'm going to get their advice. And these are the words that are spoken in 1 Kings chapter 12, starting in verse 10. The young men who he went to see replied this way: this is what you should tell them. This is what you should tell those complainers who want a lighter burden. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. Yes, my father laid heavy burdens on you, but I'm going to make them even heavier. My father beat you with whips. I will beat you with scorpions. 3 days later, Jeroboam, he was told to wait for 3 days as the king decided. Jeroboam comes back as the people return to hear what Rehoboam's decision was, just as the king had ordered. Well, Rehoboam had gone to two different people to get answers and to get this understanding of what was taking place. And he got two different results. One, you take them in, serve them. They'll be your loyal servants. Two, forget about it. Destroy them. Put on more pressure. Listen to what we read in chapter 14 of the story. Rehoboam retreated to rule Judah, the smaller region, while Jeroboam became king over Israel. You see, Rehoboam decided that he was going to keep the pressure on, and Jeroboam was like, what are you doing? Are you kidding? It's at this point that the nation of Israel begins to divide. And it's over something greater than the ownership of a hog. It's over kingship. It's over pride. There's division that takes place. And the prophecy that God spoke to Solomon that said, I'm going to strip away your kingship from your family, but one begins to happen. 10 of the tribes of Israel, 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, decide that Jeroboam is their king. And Rehoboam remains king of Judah. The rest rally behind Jeroboam. And all of a sudden, two kingdoms, in a sense, begin to rise. The kingdom is divided, northern region and southern region. 10 tribes go to the north, 2 tribes to the south. The division happens in 903 BC, and it remains throughout the Old Testament, 500 plus years. All because there's pride. All because they have to be king. All because they have to receive what they want to receive. Church, division is a nasty place to live. It churns our stomach. It boils our blood. It robs us of our joy. Division can ruin weddings. It can undermine churches' witness to the city. It can dash dreams and hopes. It can crush the spirits of innocent children. Division within a family can destroy generation after generation after generation. And we begin to see this play out in the nation of Israel. That as they've decided that it's about them, that there's this pride, there's this, I'm always right, it's always me, that this division takes place and two kings begin to rise in power, and there's tension that is continually at play. Almost like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Why? And why does this happen? Why does this happen? And what I want to do with our remaining time this morning is I want to begin to help us to understand what we learn about family division. What we learn about family division and how dangerous it is in our lives and how it can destroy not just our moments in our lives right now, but how it has ripple effects throughout the generations. Luke chapter 11, Jesus speaks these words and he says this, Jesus knew their thoughts. So he said, any kingdom divided by civil war is doomed. A family splintered by feuding will fall apart. A family splintered by feuding will fall apart. In other translations, this verse reads this way. It takes family out and it puts in the word house. And it says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. A house divided against itself cannot stand. In this teaching, in this understanding, we begin to understand what house or family means. That it could actually mean a family, your own home, your own family unit. It could mean an individual, your own life between you and God, that relationship. It could mean the church, the family of God, or a business, or in the case that we're reading about in 1 Kings, the entire nation. That once a house, once an individual is divided against itself, once a family is divided against itself, once a church is divided against itself, once a business is divided against itself, once a nation is divided against itself, it cannot stand. Division has long-term effects. And we see this played out in the nation of Israel, and I pray that it doesn't play out in your personal life, in your family life, in this church, in this region, and in this nation. But we have to guard ourselves because our nature is all about us, and us causes tension. Us can cause division. Now, there are so many outside factors and forces that threaten unity within your home, within the church, within our nation, and stability. And we can begin to look at all of these different factors that are inside, internal factors, external factors. I mean, I know there's lots. But the truth is, once a home or a house turns against itself, it's just a matter of time before it crumbles. Before it crumbles. So what can we do to avoid this? What we're going to look at are 4 principles that we see of unity and to hold division at bay throughout the nation of Israel. It focuses our attention on these 4 principles that lead us to seek unity, not division. To seek unity over division, whether it be in your personal life, whether it be in your family, whether it be in the church, whether it be in our region or our nation. Division can crumble a house faster and faster as it goes down generation to generation. The first principle is this: be careful who you listen to. Be careful who you listen to. It's pretty easy to see that a rookie mistake that Jeroboam, the son of Solomon, made. He rejected the advice of the elders to build unity with all the nations. If you build unity, basically, here's what they're saying. If you build unity, you would have been king over them all. But there was an upper story at play. And he rejected that, and he sought the advice of the young men that he grew up with. He listened to the people that were his own age. Truth is, if you listen to the people your own age and you're not taking advice from anybody else or any experience, you're probably not going to be very well versed in how to deal and or handle with something. I know in my own life, I need to have advice from every age demographic to help me to understand, to help me to grow, to help speak into experience, something that I've never been through. I just had the opportunity to do a quick shout-out video for a pastor who was a mentor in my life. 35 years of marriage. There's experience there that can speak to help me in my marriage, to help others. We need advice from multiple people. But Rehoboam makes the mistake and rejects the advice and only seeks the advice of those around him. But there's more than just not having the experience. These guys grew up with him. What do you think the likelihood of them actually telling him what they should do as opposed to saying what's best for them? I mean, sometimes in the middle of the situation, it's hard for those that are close to you to be able to tell you honestly what you should do because it may affect the relationship or it may cause tension. But truth is, we need people to speak honestly. So we need to be careful who we listen to, because if we listen to the wrong voices, it can cause us to do things that we should never do. Listen to Proverbs chapter 27, verse 6. I love it. It says this: wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. Wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. You need to have friends around you that will tell you the truth, that will lay it straight out and not just look what's best for them, but look what's best for you. You need to hear and be open. You need to make sure to help prevent division that you recognize and you are listening to the right voices. You need to be careful who you listen to, because if all you do is listen to the popular voices or the loud voices that seem to radiate culture, you might find yourself in a lot more trouble. Voices of experience, voices of honesty, voices that may hurt for a moment need to be heard. Better are wounds from a sincere friend than many kisses from an enemy. Wise words. The second principle is this: division is seldom one-sided, and you need to own your part. If we look at the story of the nation of Israel, it appears that Rehoboam is the one who's completely at fault. He's completely in the wrong. He's the one who rejected the advice. He's the one that oppressed the people. He's the one that took the king that wasn't supposed to be the king. He's the one that's wrong. It's all his fault. But before you just blame Rehoboam in this story, you need to back up and hear a little bit of the backstory of Jeroboam. He's told by a prophet that he would become the king. So he's told by the prophet that he would become the king. But he takes matters into his own hands. He tries to make it happen faster. He tries to steal the kingship away from Solomon while Solomon's still alive. And while he's trying to do this, Solomon recognizes it and then tries to have him destroyed. So he flees to Egypt and hides because he's afraid for his life. That the king is going to kill him, and then he's never going to be king. Jeroboam was ambitious. He wanted the position. He wanted to become king. After he gets what he wants, we learn that he only gets 10 of the 12 tribes. But he's afraid that if those 10 tribes begin to worship God, that they're going to reject him, and then they're going to go after back to Rehoboam, back to the line of Solomon. So he builds golden calves and idols for the nation to worship. And the people follow him and begin to worship. And we heard in the video that God sends a prophet, speaks to Jeroboam, confronts him about this, and it's just nasty. But see, all the fault doesn't fall on Rehoboam, which, if we quickly look at the story, this is what we think happens. That we have to own our own faults, that it's never one-sided, that we have to own our own part, that sometimes we're the problem, that sometimes we made the mistake, and we need to own it and not hide from it and not reject it. You can't control the other person, but you can control your own part. You can't control the other person, but you can control your own part, because division is seldom one-sided, that we have to own our part. And the truth is, I find the best posture of humility creates the best environment for healing. When we're willing to say, I screwed up. I made an error. It's a great environment for healing, for division to be restored. Number 3 principle is this: division has generational effects. Division has generational effects. Now, not only do we see this in the nation of Israel, we also see this with the Hatfields and the McCoys, and likewise the squabble between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. It ripples through families and generation to generation to generation. Listen to these scriptures that we read in 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 30. There was constant war. There was constant war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam. There was constant war. There was never any satisfaction, never any peace. 1 Kings chapter 15, there was war between Abinadab and Jeroboam throughout Abinadab's reign. That this continued on through generation to generation. 1 Kings chapter 16, there was constant war between King Asa of Judah and King Baasha of Israel. This continued on through generation to generation to generation. That it doesn't just end in a moment. Division took place in 930 BC and continued throughout the Old Testament. That this ran for a series of years. Division can ruin families, not just right here and now, but for generations. Look at the Hatfields and the McCoys. I mean, if you want to think about movies, think about the Montagues and the Capulets. Romeo and Juliet. It can ruin families for generations and generations and generations. When you decide to destroy a relationship, you need to remember that it will usually run throughout the generations. It doesn't just end. Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, I love these words, do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. Do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. Listen to these words. God's heart is not division. God's heart is unity. But when we get ourselves involved and we get too proud and we get too full of ourselves and we get too stubborn and we dig our heels in where we shouldn't dig our heels in, then we find ourselves in a place where division happens. Ultimately, if you want to sum it all up to this principle, number 4 is this: that getting your focus off God is the root cause of division. Bottom line is this: getting our focus off of God is the root cause of division. Because once we stop seeking God and we begin to seek ourselves, then we become more bent on being stubborn and proud and getting everything we want. But when we continue to look to Him, we continue to seek God, we find unity. We own our mistakes. We own our errors. And we find unity in your family, in the church, in the nation. Guys, we must stay close to God and put Him first. The biggest wall of protection that we can put around our families, the biggest wall of protection we can put around our church, the biggest wall of protection we can put around our region and our nation is to protect ourselves and to seek God with all that we are. The single greatest thing that I can do as your pastor to preserve unity within this church is to walk closely with God, to seek Him, and to lead us into His presence personally in my life, in my family, and in this church. God wants unity, not division. Single greatest thing I can do as a husband is to walk closely and humbly with God, to honor my wife, to love my wife the way that Christ loved the church, to be a father is to walk closely with God, to love my kids the way that God loves them. Guys, if I get my focus off of God, man, it becomes a mess. The nation of Israel lost focus on God, and division struck for years. But God's speaking. Church, are we listening? God's speaking. Are we listening? We need to keep our focus on Him. Keep our focus on God. On June 14th, 2003, Bo and Ron McCoy partnered with Rio Hatfield and declared an official truce between the families that had been feuding at war for over 100 years. The document was signed by 60 descendants from both sides of the family, and the governor of Kentucky and the governor of West Virginia made a proclamation declaring June 14th, Hatfield and McCoy Reconciliation Day. Why? Because they probably both chose to own their part in the feud, and they both chose to get their eyes off themselves to see unity in a greater purpose. Rio Hatfield said he wanted to show that if these two families could reach an accord, others could also. Ron McCoy said that up to then, the Hatfields and McCoys have been representing feuding and fighting. But by signing this, hopefully people would realize it's not the final chapter. The war is over, but unity can exist. Remember, Jesus said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. The truth is, the opposite is also true, that a house united can withstand anything. This is God's prayer for you and for me, that we would be united, not divided like the nation of Israel, not so proud that it's all about us, but that we focus our attention and our eyes on Him, that He becomes our priority. We own our mistakes. We're careful who we listen to. And we seek God that He would restore, that He would renew and revive. So let me ask you this question this morning. Church, is there an area in your life where maybe division has crept its way in? What do you need to do to restore that relationship? How can you end that division now so it doesn't make effects generation upon generation? Maybe there's division or ripple within different families, within our church or our region, and you're hearing me this morning. What can you do to own your part, to seek forgiveness, and to see God restore that relationship so that we can see God's kingdom expand here in the Algoma region? tell you this. I don't want to be like the nation of Israel, some hundreds of years later, still living in the same division. I want to choose to hear God speak and to respond, to seek unity over division, to listen to the right voices, to own my part, and to seek God with everything that I am, and to focus on Him as we see God move across this region. Would you pray with me this morning? Father, thank you for today. God, thank you for Mother's Day, and thank you for what you're doing with every mom in this country, across this world. God, I thank you for how you're moving and how you're leading. But God, I pray now, if there's any area in our life that we may find division, God, that you would help us. God, that you'd help us to own our part and to seek you above everything else. God, I pray for restoration to any broken relationships now. I pray restoration to broken marriages, to broken relationship with children and parents, to broken relationships within the church, within our region. God, that you would begin to restore and heal. And God, I pray right now for those that may be walking through sickness, God, that you know their bodies, whether it be cancer or COVID, whether it be an ailment, whether it be an injury, whether it be a cold. God, I pray that you would bring healing to their bodies in the name of Jesus. So God, here we are. Would you have your way in our life? Would you help us to direct our focus, to redirect our attention on you, to you. God, that you would help us to find unity instead of division. So God, we thank you for what you're going to do and how you're moving across this region. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. And everybody said nice and loud,